Hey folks, we're about to start another episode of Ask Us Anything about electrochemistry. But before we begin, because we have some extra time, there are a few things I'd like to go over first. While we're waiting for the live stream to start, type your question into the chat. The sooner we get your question, the sooner we'll be able to answer it when the live stream starts. We usually try to answer questions in the order that we receive them, but it's definitely possible that we get so many questions that when your question comes up, we're out of time. If you are a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 YouTube member, you do get priority in us answering your question. You also have the opportunity to join us on the stream to either share slides or talk to us in person about your specific electrochemistry research questions. If you are a Tier 1 or Tier 2 member on our YouTube channel, you will find in the community post the link and password to join us on our broadcasting platform. We get a lot of questions about electrochemistry, whether it's through our YouTube comments, webinars, email, phone conversations. We get lots of questions from people about electrochemistry. And sometimes responding to a YouTube comment or trying to describe a cyclic voltammogram over the phone isn't always the easiest way to teach or describe electrochemistry. That's why we created this live stream. In the Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry live stream, you can ask us any questions you have about electrochemistry, and we can use better tools and take more time to describe some of these electrochemical processes to help you with your research and understanding of electrochemistry. Now, in our time of doing this live stream, we've observed that if you ask a very, very specific question, we might not be able to answer it. It'll be a little bit too specific for us. On the other side, if you ask a very broad question and you're interested in just a very broad understanding of cyclic voltammetry, we have separate tools, we have other resources to help you. So we do have a YouTube video on cyclic voltammetry, an introduction to the subject. And if you're interested in more of a long-form course on, say, electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, we have a 5-part EIS webinar series for our Tier 2 YouTube members that you can access at any time. Now, if you weren't aware, Pine Research Instrumentation is a company that produces a wide array of high-quality electrochemical research equipment, from potentiostats to electrodes, electrochemical rotators, cells, different types of accessories. Pine Research has been supporting electrochemistry research and teaching for decades. Recently, we have developed new electrochemical simulation software called Aftermath Live. Aftermath Live is an online streaming platform where you can simulate popular electrochemical techniques like cyclic voltammetry. It's a powerful research tool, as you might simulate a cyclic voltammogram to support an electrochemical mechanism for your redox reaction that you're studying. But Aftermath Live and cyclic voltammetry simulation is also a very powerful tool when it comes to just learning electrochemistry. In fact, in previous episodes of the live stream, we have used Aftermath Live and our simulation software to answer some of the questions that you have. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can get a 10% discount on your first month of the basic and research editions of Aftermath Live by using the coupon code PINEYouTube10 when you're at checkout. Aftermath Live is a powerful tool and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Go to aftermathlive.com to check it out. Link is in the description below. Our live streams are normally on Fridays from 1 to 3 p.m. They normally last about 2 hours, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. If you miss the live stream, you'll always be able to watch it on our YouTube channel, and in the description we put timestamps for every question that was asked. This way you can look through the description and find the questions that are most relevant to your research and then watch those at your leisure. Also, we apologize in advance if we mispronounce your name. If on a YouTube channel you can put anything you want as a name. It could be a Pokemon, it could be a string of numbers. But if we call you out and we accidentally mispronounce your name, we apologize in advance. Lastly, please do not spam the chat. We've had numerous instances of people either talking about inappropriate things or constantly filling the chat up with some kind of spam. We will remove you if you do that. Let's keep the chat very clean and just talk about electrochemistry. Sometimes it takes a while before we're able to answer your question. So if you keep typing your question into the chat and spam the chat, then we will remove you from the chat. But if it's been a while and we may have forgotten about your question, one message as a gentle reminder is all that's required. All right, I think that's all of the housekeeping things. Now, let's start the live stream.
All right. Hello, everybody. And
Hello,
welcome to
welcome.
another episode.
We have switched the situation from last week. I am now in a discrete location off in the distant forest, and Alex is the one snug in our office. Right.
Yes. Yeah. Don't worry. Next week, we'll be back. Everything will be back to normal, hopefully.
It will be. I suspect many of you might be in the same condition of spring break. March to April time, I think, is the spring break for many folks in university. I know different places in the US or in different countries have different weeks. So I suspect that's what may be happening in any case. Welcome.
All right. So we'll get started. We have a question from Clement. Clement asks or says, I'm a beginner in using electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, and I want to know how to use a Warburg element when I'm searching to measure impedance and ionic electrolyte. And hopefully my connection is okay. But I don't know.
Now you're back.
I'm back. Oh, did it blank out for a second?
It cut out while you were reading the question for some reason, at least on my end. I don't know.
Oh, okay. That may have happened, so I'll just read it again. I'm a beginner in using electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, and I want to know how to use a Warburg element when I'm searching to measure impedance and ionic conductivity of a smart electrolyte.
I think what's strange, first of all, just Clement, you can clarify what you mean by smart electrolyte. I don't know what that is in reference to. I've never heard of a moderately intelligent electrolyte or a dumb electrolyte for that matter. I don't know if you're testing some sort of special type of system I'm not familiar with, but I'm not familiar with the term smart electrolyte. Of course, I understand electrolyte in general as it relates to this. But what I can try to do is share, and again, the other part here, and again, you can clarify if you wish.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to process what I mean. Precisely what you mean as far as how to use the Warburg element as a general rule of like, how do I fit it in my circuit? Or if you're just looking for how to get some analysis out of the Warburg element. And my first actually short answer, I think, is that the Warburg element is one that defines impedance, which is correct. You're searching to measure impedance, but it's impedance specifically of diffusion, right? And there's a couple of different types of Warburg, but most commonly it's used to describe what we call semi-infinite plane diffusion. And I'll show you in just a moment here in some slides, but let me just pull up where I want to be, perhaps right here. So let me share as well. And the key here is that it's the impedance of diffusion, very broadly, I guess. And so, or very specifically, I should say, not broadly. And so to that point, it's not really, I think, something that permits you to gain insight into ionic conductivity. And in fact, I'm not aware personally how you can obtain ionic conductivity from electrochemical data or impedance data specifically. We've been through this in a handful of times, I think, on these live streams. But for example, when you're getting the impedance or the resistance, which has the units of ohms. So if you have a resistance that is in units of ohms, right? And what we often do is the equation L over R times A. And you'll have to help me, Alex. I always screw this up. This is conductance or conductivity, and I forget I always forget which one. But basically, sometimes we use the sigma. I always screw up which is which. I know it's silly, but this is Siemens per centimeter. So this one here, Siemens is 1 over. This is the unit that we use. I think conductance. That's the name. There is a difference, sort of, between those words. So whether we're saying ionic conductivity or electronic conductivity or things like that. Did he say ionic? Oh, he said ionic. Okay. Just to clarify. So one of the ways, for example, we use impedance data to obtain conductivity is through an equation like this. Now, L is a length and A is an area. And so often what we have is some sort of like membrane, right? And then we have like Lugan tubes that are pointed towards the membrane on either side of it. Okay. And this whole thing might be drenched in electrolyte. And so what we have is something like there's a surface area A, right? And then there's some length between the Lugan tubes, and that is an L. I only point this out in some sense because this specific kind of setup where you have a defined surface area, usually there's like the area is actually defined by there's some O-rings that kind of clamp the membrane in place. And so we have a defined surface area. We have a defined length that's easy. But really it's more like we have length unit divided by an area unit. And for other systems, you just have to have those a little more well-defined. And it's not always obvious what length or area to use in some situations. And so this can be a tricky kind of a thing. But to bring it home to your question more specifically, all of that is sort of where you're getting an impedance or a resistance measurement, not a Warburg. Those are sort of different things decoupled, I guess, from each other. The Warburg, again, the semi-infinite plane Warburg element, sorry, my screen's flipping around here, looks usually something like this, where you have this 45-degree tail at low frequencies. And so the Warburg impedance is right here. And then you can get some things from it. You can make some calculations from the Warburg. Let me zoom out a little bit now. Impedance, which is effectively using this. I know this is from a webinar, so apologies. There's like these are animations I'm not showing you. I'm just kind of showing you quickly, I guess, the relevant equations. So the Warburg impedance doesn't really get you to ionic conductivity, but what it does get you to are diffusion coefficients. And so that's more generally how people use Warburg, is to get an estimate of the diffusion coefficients through an expression like this. This is from Barb and Faulkner, for instance, and a number of other places. So I see there was a brief, let me see here. So Clement had said the smart electrolyte is the electrolyte, which is based by a shear thickening fluid. Oh, so it's a non-Newtonian fluid. That's fascinating. I have never done, I can safely say, electrochemistry. I don't think. No, that's not true. I've done one little weird experiment once upon a time, but non-Newtonian fluids.
Oh yeah, this is the cornstarch thing we did like a while ago. If you could, if the diffusion coefficient changed, if you did like Ruhex and cornstarch or something like that.
Yeah, and you can just sort of stab the electrodes into it, and it's not a liquid; it's sort of solid, and it's amazing. It still works. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But in any case, I don't know that I can say a whole lot more about it, other than to sort of show you again, when you have a resistance value or an impedance value, because it's in ohms, this is usually the approach and just a very simple expression to use to get conductivity or conductance. Again, I always get those mixed up, but usually it's something of this nature. But that's separate from Warburg impedance, which is usually used to get diffusion coefficients through an expression that's something like this. And so I guess that's the most I can kind of answer to you, Clement. Please, again, clarify if you need a follow-up, or if there's something you're not understanding, or if I didn't understand what you're after quite so well, please let me know.
Yeah, I think that it may be the case because I mean, I don't know enough about non-Newtonian fluids as well. I'm actually wondering, what does the EIS even look like for a non-Newtonian fluid? And then you might go about in the EIS result and then kind of backtracking, like, okay, maybe even qualitatively you can see what the conductivity is of the electrolyte in a somewhat, I don't want to say indirect way.
I wonder, yeah, it's a good point. And honestly, I guess I wonder if, since you brought it up, because it's a good point, I want a non-Newtonian fluid, if the diffusional behavior, looks more like a Warburg short or a Warburg open. Something where, for example, it curls down. Is there a diffusion layer at all in a non-Newtonian fluid if it isn't even really sort of fluid? Is it a fixed layer, a boundary length that's not growing? These are all kind of interesting things that, to be honest, I don't have experience with or knowledge of. But your Warburg. So maybe this is a way to sort of propose an answer, and it's based in some interesting analysis. So I'll just say this, and it might apply to your situation, Clement. It might not. Okay, so take it for what it's worth. If, for example, I'm making assumptions here, you have a Warburg, but it looks like kind of like a semicircle. It's a Warburg short. One of the things that you get when you fit a Warburg short, finite element Warburg element, is the constants W and B, right? The W is the Warburg constant. You also get a B, which is related to the diffusion layer thickness, right? It's the diffusion layer thickness, and it's proportionate to the delta and I have it here, delta and the diffusion coefficient, right? So the mathematics in the circuit fitting, this is what you get. Now, the point I want to make is that the ionic conductivity requires a resistance value, like an R, which is in units of ohms. Now, again, I'm just throwing this out there because I think it's it's possible that it could be an interesting way to handle what you're talking about, if in fact there's a sort of a theoretical explanation for this. But numerically speaking, when you do a fit of a Warburg short, W times B has units of ohms, because you can see, hopefully, just based on this plot here, for instance, that a sort of Randall's or Voigt RC RQ has this semicircle here, right? R1. This thing is in my way. And the width of this semicircle is R1, right? So that's proportionate to the charge transfer resistance. With a Warburg short, there's a sort of analogous situation that you can. Sorry, it was like auto saving and taking a minute there. With the Warburg short, we have an analogous situation where because it curls down, it kind of makes a semicircle, and with a width, and the width of the semicircle is actually dimensionally equivalent to W times B. And so you can imagine, even though I just told you effectively there isn't like Warburg is the impedance of diffusion. It's not like a resistance, but the Warburg short is a special case where you kind of have a situation where you have a resistance or an impedance. The width of this pseudo semicircle is dimensionally, mathematically equivalent to W times B. So it's possible that if you fit a Warburg short, you can get W and B, multiply them together, and then use that W times B as this R in your expression. And then you can get, I don't know if that means it's the like Warburg resistance conductivity of some kind. I don't know if that necessarily means anything. I just know that dimensionally it is technically correct. It is technically ohms, and then you can get your Siemens centimeter, Siemens per centimeter. I think this is supposed to be per centimeter. But anyway, that's kind of what I can say about that. And again, I think I'll leave it there. But that's an interesting point about the non-Newtonian fluid there, Alex, just that if it doesn't behave like a regular one, maybe it looks like that. I don't know.
Well, before we move on, we had a follow-up question, and Ahmed from LinkedIn, don't worry, we will get to your question soon, but Win Hao wanted to just follow up, just because you had those slides up.
Yep.
It was based on the equation. He wanted to know, is it the case that, when you have a higher diffusion coefficient, you also have a higher Warburg impedance? So he was just looking at, I think, the equation you had where I think it's the Warburg impedance is equal to some stuff, and it's like 1 over the diffusion coefficient.
Yes.
And so as the diffusion coefficient gets higher, meaning it has and diffusion coefficients always tend to have a something times 10 to the negative whatever. So it's usually like a fraction, generally speaking. And so when you have a higher diffusion coefficient, you also get a higher Warburg impedance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just confirming that is indeed the case. And I don't know if he wants a physical explanation of that.
So I'm trying to think if that's the right way to approach this. I don't. So what you probably were seeing on my slides, and I'll share it now for like the third time in a row.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want you to close it. Just because
I know.
wait, hold on. There's another question related to it.
Yeah, it'll actually. How do I flip? Hang on. Sorry, I'm trying to share it, but I have to share. How do you flip? There we go. This one. Okay. And now I have to just show taskbar. I have to get all the windows appropriately here. This will actually be an interesting opportunity for me to share some of this thing here. So I think, in short, the one thing I will say is that it's not necessarily about the difference in the diffusion coefficients. It's about the differences in the concentrations of the species that impacts which one you're measuring. So like the difference in diffusion coefficients will be effectively the speeds at which either species moves, for example, like A and B. So in this particular case, we have, A diffuses to the surface, whatever A goes to B, and then B diffuses away. And so there's a natural question when I'm doing my Warburg, impedance, which am I measuring, like A or B for the Warburg measurement, right? For the most part, it depends on the concentrations of A and B. That's what this is about. It's not really about which diffusion coefficient is higher. It's about which one has what the concentrations are, and that's basically dictated by the Nernst equation because of which potential you're at. So what I can do here is illustrate that by showing you, here's the Nernst equation, right? So here's my equation, A plus NE goes to B. And the Nernst equation is E standard potential minus RT over NF natural log of the reaction quotient. And we're going to just assume concentrations instead of activities. So we have is concentration of B over the concentration of A. All right. So what we really have here is less a situation, again, just to repeat myself, of the differences in diffusion coefficients, but it's the differences in concentrations that matters. And so if we are at the standard potential, it means these two concentrations are technically equal because E is equal to, just mathematically here, right? E is equal to E0. So this term is 0. So the natural log of 1 is 0. Okay. And what does that mean? Well, this is the expression I had shown earlier just a few minutes ago, where we can relate the Warburg constant we get from fitting to the diffusion coefficients. And so what often comes is, which of the diffusion coefficients am I measuring? Well, the reality is that if CA is equal to CB, I can't simplify this term, right? These are equal to each other. I can't just like neglect one of them necessarily. Now, maybe you could make a case to your point, if one of the diffusion coefficients is much higher than the other, then you can say something like 1 over a bigger number is close to 0 compared to the other one. So there might be an argument you can make in that case. Like if one species diffuses like 3 orders of magnitude faster than the other species, which seems rather unlikely, to be perfectly honest with you. But let's just say that could lead you to some conclusion. For example, fast diffusion coefficient means that the Warburg constant will be higher or lower. Just looking at this equation mathematically, that might be a possibility. But what we really have here is that when we are roughly at equivalent concentrations at the surface of both A and B species, our diffusion coefficient, we can kind of push these. Basically, we're getting some average diffusion coefficient of A and B. Now, in some cases, I think this is what people are actually getting when they extract a Warburg constant to get a diffusion coefficient. Is some sort of average diffusion coefficient. But in many cases, it's like if you're going from like ferri to ferrocyanide or vice versa, I think the assumption is like how different can the diffusion coefficients really be between the same size molecule with just one electron difference of its redox state, right? Now, maybe there is a little bit of a difference, but for the most part, we can probably, in many cases, safely assume that it's not that different. And so we have two possibilities here that lead us to, more simplification of this process. The first is if we are much negative of the standard potential, and the other is if we are much more positive of the standard potential. But in this case, if we are much less, if we are at a low negative reducing potential, the reaction to B, which means that CB is greater than CA, or CA is less than CB. What does that mean? It means that this right here is a positive quantity because CB is greater than CA. So CB over CA is greater than 1. So we have E is equal to E0 minus a positive quantity. Okay, so as in E is less than E0. That's what this means. Now, come to the Warburg equation. What does it mean here? And we're going to have to make an assumption that's much greater than or much less than, right? If CB is much greater than CA, well, 1 over CB will be very small compared to 1 over CA. In other words, the smaller of the concentrations is the one that dominates the equation. Similarly to what I just mentioned to your question you could make a similar argument if you know one diffusion coefficient is larger or smaller than the other. It's just that concentration is the one that we can control usually via potential, looking at the Nernst equation. And so when we neglect this one, then we are basically measuring the diffusion coefficient of A. And then I'll just step through this one quickly so we can move on. I know there's other questions, but you can make the exact opposite argument for B, which is that if I have an oxidizing potential, the concentration of A is greater, B is in the minority, and effectively we're measuring the diffusion coefficient of B when we are in this condition. So,
well, to the guy's question, actually that equation just states that when the diffusion coefficient is large, we get a lower Warburg impedance.
Yes,
this is the original thing.
If that's the simplest answer, I was just looking for an excuse to show these slides because this is a new
that's right.
set of stuff that I've come up with, and so you're getting to be my guinea pig of practicing this part of the next time I give my EIS webinar. It's like I'm constantly trying to reassess and reevaluate where I have some things to change. But yes, mathematically speaking, you're exactly right. In this case, you could just make the direct argument. I'll go to the simplest case where we perhaps don't know the concentrations and we have some sort of amalgam D. Well, very generally, if D is high, W will be low. Generally speaking, the Warburg coefficient, as defined here, please note, as defined here for pine research stuff, there's an inverse relationship. There are people who define this the other way, where they have 1 over, and they call this sometimes like ZW or sometimes sigma or S or something. So in that case, you'd have to be careful. If you can tell by the unit, for instance, But be very careful is my caution to you. Look at how the Warburg constant is defined. We define ours in this way because it's directly proportional. It just makes sense to define it in the for example, in the numerator. And that's because we define the Warburg impedance this way with W in the numerator. But again, some people, some folks in the literature and in software have it like this or something of that nature. Then it would be the exact opposite. Then as D goes up, the Warburg constant would also go up because they're directly proportional. So I hope that's clear. Just be cautious of which representation you have, for instance, of the Warburg constant, and then you will hopefully understand how those things are related.
Yeah. All right, let's get to Ahmed had a question on LinkedIn. He said, "I'm facing a problem understanding the EIS spectroscopy. Are there any books, courses to facilitate this?" But he says, but there's nothing. I took a look on LinkedIn and it didn't have anything extra. But yeah, there are books. There is Electrochemical Impedance Spectroscopy by Mark Orzum. It's a very good book. I'll link it in the description. But before I do that, one thing that I want to share with people is we have a well, first off, we have a new website, but Neil gives these webinars on electrochemical impedance spectroscopy. He was just talking about it. You actually got a sneak peek of it just now. And if you're on the Pine Research website, I think it's showing, it's sharing, and you go to webinars, we have a whole section dedicated to webinars. You can see a huge list of all the webinars that we've given in the past. And if you want to watch it, you can find the one. We have one that's specifically on EIS applications, EIS theory and fundamentals. And there's just a very simple link that goes to our YouTube channel. And if you're a tier 2, if you don't have time to wait for another, we do this like once a year for free. But if you don't have time and you want to learn now, you can become a tier 2 YouTube member and access all of these webinars, as a tier 2 member. So they're all on the YouTube channel. And then the last thing I was going to do is find Mark Orzum's book. And let me find this. I'm just going to put a link in the chat, so hopefully you're able to see it. I'm actually going to post it in LinkedIn too, just to separately, because sometimes Restream doesn't always post it directly there.
Copy of it.
Yeah. So that is a copy to Mark Orzum's book. It is a textbook. I've read it. I've looked through it many times when I'm trying to learn or understand something, and it can be very complicated, but it's very complete. And if you do have questions about certain aspects of impedance, I mean, it even has a lot on the mathematics. It has like a whole chapter dedicated to solving second-order differential equations that are used to derive some of the equations used in impedance. So it's a very good book from that perspective. And yeah, there's also there are these short courses that the Electrochemistry Society also has. But if you want the best bang for your buck, I would say the EIS webinar series that we have is the least expensive, and I would say the most user-friendly when it comes to understanding things and learning about impedance spectroscopy. So I'd encourage you to check that out, Ahmed. Okay, all right. So that was that question. Moving on, we're just going to go, I think, in order. Clement has a second question. So he says, thank you for the first. I want to know again, what can be the advantages of 4 electrodes ascend in electrochemicals measurements?
I assume just mean the
4-point probe. Basically. Yeah, I think that's what he means. We can because Neil, I think that was the last thing you mentioned was this kind of 4-point probe technique for measuring the conductivity of an electrolyte through a membrane.
Yeah. So what the 4-point probe method allows you to do is to decouple the sense and drive lines in your potentiostat. So the method usually is something where so the cell that I was sort of referring to, you have a membrane in the middle. I'll draw it sideways this time. Okay, so here's my membrane. I'm trying to measure the conductivity of that. And basically you have usually Lugin tubes, but it's really just a way to direct the reference electrodes. Okay, so you have 2 Lugin tubes on either side here. In each of these, you'll have a reference electrode. So these are 2 reference electrodes. Okay. So this would be like, I can draw here, reference electrode, let's just say 1, and this would be reference electrode 2. And then you'll have somewhere, it doesn't matter where, usually let's just somewhere, you'll have like counter electrodes or just other electrodes, drive electrodes. So these are just like platinum coils or platinum flags or graphite rods or just 2 other auxiliary electrodes. Okay. And so what you have is, I should have drawn this lower. I bet I can move it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice.
You'll connect this to your potentiostat in such a way where you have working electrode sense and working electrode drive. Now, these are usually coupled together, right? The 4-point probe is where these are decoupled. And then you'll have counter here, and you'll have reference line connected here. And so what you're really doing is you're taking advantage of the fact that a potentiostat is kind of a decoupled device, right? A potentiostat measures, I'll try to color code this, I guess. I should have, that's fine. Measures the potential between these 2. And it measures the current. I'm sort of making it look like it's 2 different devices on purpose here. Measures the current between these 2 devices. Okay. With a 4-point probe, the benefit of it, or the advantage, I guess you will, is that we're pretty much not interested at all in current flow. Basically, we really just potential difference. Now we're doing impedance. That's entirely true. I'm kind of being, a little shorthand with how I'm describing this, but basically what we're looking for is the potential difference across the membrane, because that's what helps us get our resistance measurement, right? And essentially what we have is the distance between the working sense and the reference line. We want it to be as small as possible and not impacted by other things as possible. So for example, this distance here is including the thickness of my membrane and like a little bit of electrolyte on either side. Now, the closer that these get to the membrane, usually the better. We usually consider that this distance in this Lugin is negligible. The point of a Lugin tube is to bring the sensing point of your reference electrode all the way as close as possible. So basically, what we're saying is I can measure the potential. Let's say I have a very concentrated electrolyte. I'm measuring the potential between points 1 and points 2 right across the membrane. And so the potential that I'm measuring there, you're basically just, it's effectively, whether you're doing impedance or a slow scan voltammetry experiment, E is equal to IR basically. So this is how you're getting your sense one way or the other. You're getting an E and an I measurement, right? And so it's like, I want the E to be only related to the membrane. I'm getting the potential difference right across the membrane. So these sense lines are pointed right into the direction where I'm after. Whereas if I have 3 electrode experiments, I wouldn't be able to necessarily direct those kinds of things, the sense readings, um, where I want them, and so I can take advantage of that by decoupling the working sense and the working drive in this way.
Nice. So, yeah,
There you
so
go.
Clement, hopefully that helps you understand a little bit like why someone would use like a 4-point probe or a 4-electrode system when doing these kinds of electrochemistry experiments. Of course, if you have further questions, please let us know.
Lawn mowing or something happening outside. I hope it's not too loud.
Oh, no, I don't think it's too loud. Unless you want to like mute yourself in the meantime, I can.
I might mute myself while I'm not talking. Yeah, someone is mowing their lawn next to me or something, and it's very loud.
It's that time again. So Akash is asking, I'm getting different current when comparing my LSV and chronoamperometry at certain potential. Is there any reason for that? Now, Akash, this is what I believe your situation is, and please let me know if this is your question. So I'm actually gonna minimize your question just for 1 second. But what I imagine is you're doing LSV. And let's say you get a voltammogram that looks like, maybe it looks like this, right? And so you have different voltages, and at different voltages along your LSV, there's a current that's associated with it, right? Right, so you have different voltages. So this could be V1, V2, V3. And you have a corresponding current at each voltage. But then, and this is LSV, but then when you do chronoamperometry, you are looking at time and you're looking at the current. And when you apply, say, one, you should be getting signal that looks a little bit like this. And so the question I guess I have, and perhaps something I can talk to you about, with a little bit of clarity, is, hey, I applied V2, right? So V2 is the applied potential in this situation. But this current and this current are not equal to each other. Or similarly, you may find that this current and this current are not equal to each other, right? So we can make this red to emphasize that, like, hey, these guys are not equal to each other. And maybe you're looking at the peak potential, or the peak current specifically when you're comparing these. But that, kind of either way, there's multiple currents for any one given potential. And I'm not surprised that the current that you get in your chronoamperometry experiment, even this kind of limiting current down here, is not equal to any of the currents that you're measuring on your LSV. And even if your LSV is at a very slow scan rate, which we don't know or we don't have any information about right now, yes, this is my worries. Okay, so I'm just getting a little bit of a confirmation from him. Yes. Okay, so this is fine. This is, in my opinion, completely normal. Now, the reason why I say that is because there's a couple things that are happening in the LSV and in the chronoamperometry experiment. So let's take a look at the chronoamperometry first. So when you're doing chronoamperometry and you get this spike and this decay, again, time and current, this area right here in the very short time window is associated with several things. And I will actually type these because I have a word thing. So this is associated with a few things. There are some Faradaic electron transfer, generally speaking, but it also has to do with double layer charging. So you have these two things, two processes. There's also, you would call this, there's a slight contribution of solution resistance. I put this in parentheses because the solution resistance will minimize the peak current. If you have solution resistance, you'll have an IR drop associated with this peak current. So there are these processes that are affected with this peak. Okay, now in the LSV, right? So if we go back here in the LSV, those things, double layer charging, is like a background signal, right? There's like a background because you're applying a kind of a constant because you're applying a constant scan rate. Sorry, so you have some kind of scan rate nu. That scan rate is going to lead to double layer charging on top of your signal. So you have kind of two things. Now, in chronoamperometry, you're going from basically, let's just say 0 directly to V2. But in cyclic voltammetry, or sorry, in LSV, you're really going from I'm going to say maybe V.19 to V2. You're going from you're going from 0 to a big voltage, and that creates a big jump. There's a huge current increase associated with the charging of the electrical double layer. In this case, there is a kind of constant background signal, but it's not associated with that. It's like there's a much smaller jump in potential, if you will. And so you're not going to get the same amount of background current associated with that process. Similarly, there's also these Faradaic electron transfer processes occurring. There can be a lot of those because in one case, you're at a potential where nothing's happening. That's this red. There's no Faradaic processes happening here. And then you're moving to a potential where maybe lots of Faradaic processes are happening, right? So we even see like, oh, if this is 0 and you have this V2, oh man, like tons of Faradaic processes are happening when you go from 0 to V2. But when you're going from like, this point or this point, you already have a lot of those processes that have already happened. From here on, there, we already have current that's associated with, Faradaic electron transfer. So in my view, this is at least an explanation as to why the peak current here is not going to be equal to the current here. It's because the things that contribute to this current, the Faradaic, electron transfer and double layer charging, are very different magnitudes in a chronoamperometry versus LSV. A lot of the stuff that's happened at some of these potentials have already happened or have been accounted for at different potentials that are less, less positive or less negative, depending if you're doing a reduction or an oxidation. But that's the main thing. I hope that makes sense. Let's see. So yeah, and he just said I've used 5 millivolts per second for LSV. Yep, it doesn't matter if it's 5 millivolts per second, 1 millivolt per second, 100 millivolts per second. You will still have a little bit of that difference, and I'd say a lot of that. Then in that case, maybe more of the current is associated with the Faradaic charge transfer. That's going to explain the difference. But you can even do a little bit of a calculation. You can say, if you can determine what the capacitance is, and that's by looking at a kind of non-Faradaic region, and then looking, this is a rough estimation. If you assume that in your LSV, and let me just show you just so that you're clear. If you just want to prove this to yourself, let's say your LSV looks a little bit more voltage, current, and let's say it looks a little bit more like this within like a small window. You can look at you can look at this, how much current this is, right? So let's say this is 0. You're going from 0 to here. So maybe you get like some you know, like 5 microamps. I'm just making up some numbers, microamps. And then the current is equal to the scan rate in volts per second. So this is 0.005 volts per second. And then times the capacitance. And then this would actually be 0.0000, you know, 5.
A lot of zero.
A lot of zeros. Sorry, that's how. Sorry, in my mind, I have to think like, oh, how many like zeros do I put for this to be 5 microamps, 5 millivolts?
Divided by 10 to the minus 3.
Yeah, I could just say 10 to the minus 3, 10 to the minus 6.
Anyway,
math. But math, yeah. So you do this math, and then you figure out you have like a millifarad capacitor, and then you can start to like think about, hey, when I do this, generally speaking, you can say, oh, well, this is my background capacitance, and when I go to different scan rates, I can just kind of multiply by this, whatever my scan rate is, to estimate how much extra current difference there is between this peak and where the current is here. So that's kind of a small thing. But yeah, even if you have 5 millivolts a second, you are still charging an electrical double layer to a different voltage each time, and there's current associated with it, which is different than stepping the potential from like 0 to set to 2 or something like that. So hopefully that makes some sense. And
well, I think Alex is frozen again. Oh, there he is. Okay. Are you back?
Oh, my friend. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm on Wi-Fi. Like, I only actually have enough plugs for like 3 things. So
yeah, it seems to happen when this happened to me before too. It's like when you go from sharing to not sharing a screen, for some reason, sometimes it hiccups a little bit. I don't know why.
It hiccups a little bit. That makes
when you're
sense.
on Wi-Fi, it does that too. I'm on Wi-Fi also, so I don't know. We have no hope. But
yeah, we have no hope today.
But we will press on for as long as the internet doesn't fail us, I guess. And Abderrahman has a question that says,
yes.
Hello, does the Warburg diffusion occur for electrons as well? I've done an EIS on a polymer electrolyte without the lithium salt and got a Warburg short-like behavior. So in short, no. Warburg is in relevance to ionic transport, mass transport. Electron movement is extremely quick. I suppose I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, there's no way to measure electron movement like practically with electrochemistry. It's not. Electrons they move at the speed of light. It's basically right.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Like, electrons don't diffuse,
right.
as a molecule diffuses randomly. Yeah. Like,
and also electrons don't move within an electrolyte, whether it's a polymer or a liquid, for that matter. That would make, if electrons just moved, like jumped in the solution or across a polymer, basically the entire field of electrochemistry would be null and void and wouldn't work. Which we would be out of a job. So I hope that doesn't happen. You can think about it like you connect electrodes in solution or in a polymer, wherever it is, the electrons have to go through the potentiostat so you can measure them. Ions are what move within the solution or the polymer electrolyte or whatever. That's what maintains the charge balance. Negative electrons, negative charges move from here to here. So negative charges have to move in solution from here to here, or positive charges can move the other direction. But we have to have a balance of positive and negative moving in the correct directions to balance the charge during an electrochemical experiment. But it's not electrons that move down in the solution. I mean, your phone and your battery and your laptop and everything wouldn't work if that were the case, because that's fundamentally the electrons moving is electricity that helps charge and power stuff, right? If the electrons could just jump ship straight into the solution, batteries wouldn't even work, and well, they do. So no, it's not that. Now, If you're getting a Warburg short behavior, you said you don't have the lithium salt, but you probably have some salt of some kind in your electrolyte. Maybe you're trying to do some sort of a blocking boundary kind of a experiment, as some people do in these situations, which is where you like have your electrodes right next to each other, and then in between them you don't provide, like in this case, the lithium. So there's no lithium intercalation, but you still do experiments, and so it's a way to probe the microstructure, for example, of your electrodes, because the electrolyte can still go between electrodes back and forth. It can still move around. Even in a polymer electrolyte, you can still have ions moving around. You can still get information. You're just not doing the Faradaic charge or discharge kind of processes. And so the fact that you got a Warburg short behavior doesn't necessarily shouldn't necessarily discourage you, actually. And in reality, it might be giving you some really good information about the diffusional behavior of your electrodes themselves, or the membrane itself, and precisely where the diffusional path is. I don't know, obviously, but there's diffusion happening somewhere, and if you have a Warburg short, it's indicating that you have a fixed length of diffusion. Again, whether it's in the polymer electrolyte itself or the electrode pores or something of that nature, and you're getting information about that. So there's still value in that kind of data, I would say, even apart from having the lithium plus to do the Faradaic charge discharge kind of processes.
Yeah, this actually reminds me a little bit because of the video I made. So if your polymer electrolyte doesn't have lithium salt in it, but there is a place where you could get lithium salt, you would get the Warburg short at a sufficiently low enough frequency that the lithium, I think this is what I think might be happening, is an ion, maybe a lithium ion from the other, I guess it would be the cathode, I think, because I'm still learning battery terminology, would have to diffuse through that polymer electrolyte. Now, even though you didn't pre-soak it with the electrolyte, on the time scale of the short, which is where you're getting that curl that hits the x-axis, on that time scale, that's enough time for like an ion from solution to go all the way from one end of the electrode to the other end of the electrode to grab charge. And so on that time scale, it has plenty of time to pass charge between those two sides through an electrolyte that doesn't have the lithium salt or the lithium ion, that it then acts as I don't want to say a short circuit, but you only have the quote real impedance at that stage. So that's what I think about when you describe this. Is like, oh, just because you don't have lithium salt doesn't necessarily mean that no lithium or no ion is moving through that polymer electrolyte.
Yeah, it would depend on whether your electrodes are pre-lithiated or not, what state your electrodes are in. So like, for instance, and that's the last point, is that maybe there's a contamination. So that's one possibility as well. Maybe, you have some polymer blending. It's possible you have some latent electrolyte in the polymers, perhaps, that's causing some ionic movement, if your expectation was like no ionic movement of some kind. Or as Alex said, if you're testing like graphite anodes, for example, right, and you put both sides graphite because you're trying to study no lithium anything, then it wouldn't be there'd be no lithium unless there's just contamination or there's something, whatever. But if you just put like lithiated cathode material here and anode material here and no lithium salt, the situation you just described could absolutely be the case. Like, it takes a long time to get there, and then eventually it's just real impedance, hence the Warburg short. It's sort of the distance time kind of argument from your video. But the point being is that it can take a while because when you have lithium ions saturated in solution, it's like lithium leaves the cathode and goes into the anode, but it's more like you have it's like a train, right? You have like a bunch of lithium in the middle, everywhere. And so a lithium comes out of here, and it's like the Newton's cradle. It pushes the balls on the end, right? But when you have no lithium in the middle, this lithium has to really make its way all over, and that can take a little while.
So moving forward, we have a question from Jyoti, who's asking, can you please tell me in one cycle of cyclic voltammetric, I guess, experiment, all redox active molecules like ferri, ferro got oxidized. Why current is rise in electrochemical sensing on every addition of analyte? So why does the current rise with every addition of analyte? Well, that makes sense if you add more of the analyte that's getting oxidized or reduced, like ferri or ferrocyanide. If there's more molecules, you're gonna get a higher current. There's a direct proportionality to the concentration of your species with the current response that you get. So if you're doing like a titration experiment, and of course if I'm not getting, if this isn't what you're asking, please clarify. But in a lot of electrochemistry equations, especially ones related to the current, there is a concentration dependence, a linear concentration dependence. So as you increase the concentration of your species, ferro or ferrocyanide, you get a higher current value in response. So I think that is what you are asking, Jyoti. And why is that the case? More, the current is directly, current is just the movement of ions, per unit time. If there are more ions associated with doing a redox reaction, like ferro or ferrocyanide, you're going to get more current at a particular potential because there's a higher concentration. There's more of them at the electrode surface available to do a reaction. I think that's what you're asking. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't really quite tell. The wording of the question is a little unclear if they're adding the same thing or like a different analyte, or
yeah.
I'm not, to be honest, exactly sure either what is going on. I mean, the other possibility to interpret her question is you're oxidizing and you're wondering why the electrochemical sensing, like, I don't know, are you just going to too positive a potential, and so you're going into the oxygen evolution reaction, and so that's why your current is increasing? I don't know precisely what you're asking, which of those sort of explanations. So perhaps you can try to clarify if you'd like, or maybe Alex answered it that way, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm a little bit confused to exactly what you're referring to. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to move on. In the meantime, we have a question from Sidhu is asking, good evening. I'm a beginner in this field and have started to learn and work from the basics, i.e. glucose biosensor. I'm trying to mediate the electron transfer by using ferrocene. I think he then continues to say, many have worked on this, but for me, the redox current of ferrocene is decreasing in each cycle, and finally, I'm able to get the capacitive current of the, I believe that's carbon nanotubes. I've tried all physical chemical methods. I've also tried increasing and decreasing the percentage of the binder. I've tried 0.05% to 5% naphthalene and even polystyrene. So let me see if I can.
I'm not sure I understand what the question is. Is it you're having trouble getting? Finally, I'm able to get. I guess are you trying to find the capacitive current of the carbon nanotubes? Is that the problem you're having? I don't know if I see a question. Am I missing something?
Yeah. He is first just described other things. Many have worked on this, but for me, the redox current of the ferrocene is decreasing in each cycle.
So that's probably just a reference electrode thing. I'm guessing you have some sort of a pseudo reference, like maybe a silver wire or something like that. If the redox current, I'm sorry,
the ferrocene, yeah, like redox for current of ferrocene is decreasing, which could mean
Your
something's
material's
clogging.
getting, I mean, is your
Yeah.
material getting deactivated in some way, or something in each cycle? Yeah, I mean, so you're. I think you're on the right track in terms of like your thinking. If we sort of talk this through and think about it, but like, okay, so you're playing with some of the engineering parameters, like the amount of binder, because one of the possibilities, if your current is decreasing from cycle to cycle of the ferrocene redox, which in theory it might. I was mixing up current, like it might move potential wise, but that's fine. The ferrocene is the thing that you can center to, right? Your reference electrode just is a pseudo, maybe silver wire, and wherever the ferrocene is, you can just spin it back to zero, afterwards, and so that's not a problem. But if its current is decreasing over time, it does suggest that you're either losing some of your catalyst, like it's falling off the electrodes, which could mean the binder isn't adequate. Your electrode construction or composition is inadequate, isn't ideal. It could mean that there's some other kinds of processes occurring, like agglomeration. Trying to get a stable response for the mediator reference electrode is silver chloride and KCl. Does ferrocene work? Does ferrocene work in aqueous?
No,
Yeah,
it
so I don't
shouldn't.
know.
Like,
So
ferrocene. I don't think.
Is it even
works.
soluble? I don't even think it's that. I'm not sure.
Barely. That's why people use ferrocyanide or
Ruhex
or Ruhex or something like that.
So for acidity, I think I'm not sure if you're saying the right chemical, or do you mean ferrocyanide? But you said ferrocene, and so ferrocene is not really appropriate for use in KCl. Maybe you're saying the reference electrode is that, but maybe your electrolyte is.
Yeah, is it acetonitrile? Because in some cases, you can get away with silver chloride and acetonitrile.
Yeah, if you have acetonitrile as your electrolyte, you can sometimes use a silver chloride aqueous reference. It's not the best idea because you will have a higher impedance in your frit going from the aqueous to the non-aqueous. It does work, but it's not, in my opinion, the best idea. Plus, it leads to the possibility of water leakage into your electrolyte, and many non-aqueous experiments are very intolerant to even a small amount of moisture. So if you're using an aqueous reference electrode with your non-aqueous system, it could be very detrimental to your results. So I don't know if that's part of it, if you're getting some impact over time from water, whatever water might do in your particular system. I can't say perfectly. But maybe your catalyst is agglomerating slightly over time and losing surface area. That would decrease the current. It could be deactivating in some way. So I think you're on the right track in terms of thinking about getting a stable signal before you really measure the, try to get a measure of the capacitance, I guess. So yes, and I've tried all substituted ferrocene like amine and acid functionalized arguments. My supporting electrolyte is 0.1 molar PBS.
Well, so even things like ferrocene, methanol, and stuff, I've always had a hard time with their solubility in aqueous solvents.
I don't know that I'm not sure that's the best idea. It might be crashing out of solution. Anything that's just like you might be getting lower current on your ferrocene as time goes by because its solubility is so tenuous in the first place that it's not even a stable however many millimolars you could even get into aqueous. Ferrocene should not really be used in aqueous solution to the best of my knowledge. So I don't know. I would suggest trying your experiment in acetonitrile or some other non-aqueous solvent.
Yeah, or if you need to use an aqueous system, use ruthenium hexamine or hexamine, ferrocyanide, like that molecule. That tends to work quite a bit better. Even that also can stick to the surface. Like it can also break up a little bit if you're using like glassy carbon instead of gold or something like that. But ruthenium hexamine is very, very stable by comparison.
Yeah.
It works very well in aqueous systems. So I'd recommend using that. If you're just looking at getting a stable response from a redox mediator, I would pick that molecule instead of ferrocene for an aqueous system.
Yeah. Ruthenium hexamine, if you're staying in aqueous, pH 7.4. Otherwise, if you're using ferrocene, go to non-aqueous. I think that's probably fair. And then, check for the same thing. If you switch to ruthenium hexamine, now, okay, great. If that's your sort of mediator or reference point or whatever it is that you're doing, check that its current isn't also decreasing over time. That would probably be a strong indicator that there is something perhaps awry with your electrode, with the carbon nanotubes, something like that. Then you might need to still look at those things. But if you're finding that the signal for the Ruhex is just fine, unlike the ferrocene, then it probably was using ferrocene in aqueous was a problem.
Yes, he's also asking, do physical methods for immobilizing meteors really work? I'm trying to sense glucose from sweat. So the physical methods that, the only thing I know about tethering redox meteors have actually been, I would say, chemical methods. So a lot of people will put a redox mediator on an alkane thiol or something, and then that chemically binds to the surface. So it's not like physically attaching the redox molecule to the surface. It's chemically bonding a thing that's around it. But it's used for sensing. I actually have been learning about these aptamers. Aptamers are used a lot for electrochemical sensing, and they'll put a redox mediator on this aptamer so that when it captures the analyte of interest, the redox mediator gets close to the electrode surface and you get a signal. But yeah, like physical methods, I don't know. I'm not so sure about the quote physical methods.
There probably might be some, and I'm not familiar with them, to be honest. So
yeah, and so buffer within a pH range of 5.5 to 7.4. That's fine as long as it's conductive. That's okay. But yeah, I'm not super familiar with those things.
This next one is something you answer. This is like your special thing every 2 or 3 episodes.
Oh yeah, that's right. Prasheda is asking, how do we find out the particular potential range for CV for a particular material? It's a very good question. So, let me just pull up this drawing board here. So, generally speaking, you can theoretically determine, a rough potential range, but really, in actuality, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is if you have like just try it, your initial starting thing. But you want to determine the potential range in CV empirically. Because theoretically, there's a lot of reactions that can occur, but what I usually recommend people do is they start CV. Actually, it probably wouldn't even look like this. It would actually, let me redo that. Is to do CVs within these very small potential windows. So first start doing CV here, and you might get something like this. And then you're like, okay, well, I didn't get very much current. Let me go a little bit wider. And then you do that, and then maybe it looks like this. And then here it looks, maybe it looks like this. And then like, okay, I'm starting to see a little bit, but still not a lot of current. And so you go a little bit further. And then you find that like, oh, this thing starts to go all the way down here, and then on the way up it goes, and then it's kind of here, and then it goes maybe something like this. And so you're like, well, this is still kind of okay. I know here, this is basically like I'm getting too much current. There's something here that's limiting my potential range. But here I could go a little bit further, so I do the same experiment, and then I realize like, oh, this really starts, I really, it's really kind of around here. Even you may even want to pick something like this. Is like, this here is my potential window, my effective potential window, because it can be almost anything. You can have water electrolysis. You can have the electrode material, breaking apart. If you have something like, carbon or something like that, or a special kind of carbon, maybe it starts to break apart and you form these chunks of carbon, coming off of the electrode when you go to, super high positive potentials. But maybe down here, it's, you have some water and you're converting it into hydrogen gas. You're doing, that was not a good H right there. Hydrogen gas, and that could be happening, right? When you go to these very negative potentials, but you just don't know off the bat with a new material, so it's always safe. And let me just be OCP versus reference can be okay, but if this is 0 versus OCP, so 0 versus OCP, this kind of gives you a good idea of like where to start. And that's how you should determine the working electrode range, or the potential window for your cyclic voltammetry experiments. So hopefully that helps. Okay. All right.
I think so. Sidhu was just following up saying there's a couple of methods that he was using, the butylaldehyde method, I guess, but I'm not familiar with these. But it does seem like you're doing good work in narrowing things down, and it does, just as a general comment, I'd say you're iterating on the I don't know what you say, experimental parameters pretty well. So keep doing that. I suppose you'll eventually optimize your system and figure out the best parameters for your binding and glucose monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
Vineet has a question saying, as I'm fitting Randall's circuit in an EIS experiment, my RCT comes out negative for ferro solution. What can I do for correcting this with glassy carbon electrode? If you're getting a negative result, something is wrong, either with your
definitely.
Yeah, so to say the least. Something is wrong with your fitting algorithm, your experiment, or both. But also I would mention that, for example, if your Nyquist plot, or looks something like that, or something like that, where it's kind of just a straight line, but you're sort of fitting, a Randall's circuit, whether it's a CPE or a CPE or a capacitor. That's the word I'm looking for. Sorry. And you're trying to measure this RCT here, right? Well, this circuit should give you at least something like this, right? There should be some kind of semicircle somehow, and otherwise, you're not getting anything. So my thought is that which potential are you doing impedance at? Because if for example, it depends on if you have ferri or ferro as your primary solution, or if you have a 50-50 mixture. Sometimes what I see people do is, for example, they have a 50-50 mixture of ferri ferrocyanide. And I think what that does is it sort of like pins the open circuit potential right at the E0, basically, because when you have, like, I always screw this up, ferri reduces to ferro, or do I have it backwards? Is that right?
Yeah, I know. I never get it right.
I never
remember which one refers to which one.
Right. So whatever the reduction is, right? If you're looking at this CV, for instance, and this is 0 here, so this is 0 current, and this is potential. If you're doing the if you have all of the oxidized form and you're studying the reduction, let me start over. You're going to basically, your CV is going to be like, is a little bit of double layer capacitance, and then you're going to reduce, and then they're going to get, it's going to settle at some negative potential or whatever. And then when you come back, it's going to settle. The bulk, it's like, it just depends on whether the zero goes through this side, right? Or this side. That was messy. I just wanted to kind of illustrate what I mean. So in this case, for instance, if you are at a potential over here, you're too far from where the reduction is happening. And so your EIS data will just be capacitance. Like there's almost nothing happening, right? If you take impedance at some over potential or somewhere near the actual box where you're reducing it, yeah, I would expect you would see some behavior, because this is indicative of charge transfer process. So one of the things that might be happening is you're just fitting data and you don't really have any appreciable charge transfer. I guess something like that. And so you might want to change your applied potential. That could be it. The other explanation, again, is just that maybe you do have this and your software, whatever you're using to do the fitting, is getting a very strange result for one reason or another, which I would have to know what software you're using. If I know enough, if I could give you advice about it. Obviously, my company has our own fitting software, so I know that one best. But I see there's a follow-up to actually when I added the CPE element, it fitted perfectly, and resistance value were perfectly matched with it. Okay, well, then that might be the other thing. So yeah, if you instead of using a capacitor, you use a CPE, then that is it the correct way? There's no answer to that question other than yes, because everyone else does. Yes, because nothing acts perfectly ideally for the most part. And yes, because you are interested in primarily getting a value for this. And so the difference between a capacitor and a CPE would be like if you had a perfect semicircle with a Warburg, or your results actually more depressed like this, something like that, right? This is what reality looks like. This is what ideal looks like. But ideal is never happens. Like, in other words, if you're fitting it with the capacitor, it's possible that the algorithm is trying to fit non-ideal data to ideal data, and it's like, I don't know how you would get a negative value. I still don't know how that would happen. That's bizarre. But the point is, it's not fitting properly. And so what you're doing is you're by using a Q, a CPE, you're allowing for the fitting of an ideality. The reason we can't say with perfect clarity that it's yes, it's correct, or no, it's not correct, is because there's plenty of people who have quite strong opinions about not using constant phase elements. I'm not one of those people, but they exist. You can find them in the wild. They're like unicorns. It's a thing. They have strong feelings about not using CPEs because they're not. It's accounting for non-ideal capacitance, but what does it even mean, right? It's like, well, it's not ideal. Why? How? Well, there's ways to describe that, but the reality is you just get a Q constant, and you get an alpha, and it might be like 0.85, and it's like, well, that's one would be perfect capacitor or something. Like, it's hard to wrap your head around what that really means physically. It's like an engineering tool to get the data to fit. So from that perspective, I think it does make sense, because using SCPE as an engineering tool to fit the capacitive data is useful so that you can fit the RCT, because that's what you're really after. And so you're fitting the other stuff whatever way possible to get at the information that you really care about, which is the charge transfer resistance. So from that perspective, I think that it is a reasonable thing to do.
All right, we have,
and frankly, most people do that in the literature. They fit CPEs most often, I would say. So
we have a follow-up question from, or actually, I think it's a different question from Abdirahman. He's saying, sorry, I'm still new to this, but if I got an unfinished semicircle in the EIS and I want to check the resistance of my material and subsequently the ionic conductivity, do I have to try to find where this where the semicircle might intercept the x-axis? There was a follow-up conversation about the frequency range, and we learned that his frequency range was from 1,000 megahertz to 100,000 millihertz, which is 100 hertz.
Yes, that's 100 hertz. So
100 hertz.
I'm quite certain you did not do impedance from 1,000 megahertz because it's not physically possible. There's no instrument that can do that. I don't know if you mean 1 megahertz or 1,000 kilohertz. Please clarify the frequency.
Clarify this.
Yeah, there's way too many zeros and prefixes that aren't sort of syncing up here. I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah.
But to the crux of your question, you do not need to have a completed semicircle to get measurements. That's what circuit fitting is good for. It will allow you to fit quote unquote incomplete data effectively, right? You don't have to, if you have circuit fitting software basically, right? You don't have to estimate where the semicircle would hit the x-axis. The circuit fitting does that for you. So, in the simplest case, is it sharing? There it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking a minute. Okay.
Yeah.
In the simplest case, if your data is like this, right? And you fit, a leading resistor, and then let's just say an over RC circuit here. Let's say this is R0, whatever, and this is RCT. Okay, and you fit this, the software is going to, as best it can, I'm trying to draw it close, it's just my artistic ability. The software is going to effectively fit this for you. Now, it will find, presumably if good enough, some estimate for this. So this is where it hits the axis, but the fitting does that for you. And so it's going to come up with an answer for RCT and for R0. It's going to come up with those answers just that's just how this works. Now, the point I want to make is that you don't have to have a full semicircle. It's going to get this fit. Full semicircle, you'd have to go to a lower frequency, which sometimes causes drift and the results to be poor. And so maybe you don't lower frequency because it drifts, it's noisy and messy. But suffice it to say, if your semicircle is halfway completed, you'll probably get decent results. If your semicircle only goes up to a quarter of, well, you'll get results. If your semicircle is like only a whiff of a semicircle to here, well, then, the accuracy of results will be, who knows? Is it that? Is it that? You'll find less accurate, possibly less accuracy, depending on how much of the semicircle is appearing, right? And so the more of your semicircle that's there, the better. But there's no requirement that your data has to like fully touch the x-axis on the right, on the low frequency side, to be able to obtain fitted values, for sure. And just to be clear, your question was in regards to the resistance of your material and the subsequent ionic conductivity. So the charge transfer resistance is this width, but the ionic conductivity, as we sort of discussed earlier with like membrane conductivity, that should probably come from this. The RCT related to the charge transfer of a Faradaic process. It's some A plus NE goes to B. Since so that fair, like if the ionic conductivity is usually obtained with that equation I showed earlier, L over RA, you would use that R, not not RCT for that kind of a calculation to the bending. I don't think the RCT is what you would use for an ionic conductivity of like the electrolyte or the membrane or whatever you're studying. You would use the high frequency intercept at the left side, which actually doesn't make any difference whether you have a full semicircle or not to that point. So it might be that you don't even need the semicircle in the first place. You just need the high frequency intercept. If you're trying to get like uncompensated ohmic resistance and correlate that with some sort of conductivity.
Yeah, I think his last comment was like, "Oh, okay, he needs to find the right equivalent circuit to help find the resistance," which it doesn't necessarily need to. If you just look for that x-intercept EIS data that has the lowest imaginary impedance or any y-axis data, that would be the value. So you don't even need to.
Yeah.
You don't even really need to find the equivalent circuit. Yeah.
If all you're after is the ionic conductivity and you just need an R value, yeah. You're looking for the lowest ZI, the ZR at the lowest ZI, basically. So.
All right. There is a question from Simple Rag asking, if I want to precipitate lithium carbonate electrochemically from lithium-containing solution, should I consider chronopotentiometry or chronoamperometry? I'm not so sure. I feel like I don't know, Neil, like don't you just add a carbonate salt to it, and if lithium carbonate is a precipitate, it'll come out? I don't understand when it's like you have a lithium containing solution.
I don't think lithium carbonate is
that soluble?
It gets soluble.
So you might
not
be able
to its solubility. 8.4 to 13 grams per liter.
That's a lot. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Like, it's considered insoluble in water. I'm sorry. Maybe in non-aqueous it's a little more soluble. So it's largely insoluble. Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think.
So does that mean he's got a carbonate? Does that mean he might have a lithium carbonate solution, and he's trying to apply a potential to like reduce the lithium? The carbonate's nearby. It would precipitate out at the electrode surface. I'm trying to think about what the experiment is.
So I mean, I don't know the potential at which it occurs. Yeah. Let me see if I lithium. Because my hunch tells me chronoamperometry would be better. Mm-hmm. And the reason being that it is probably it requires a certain potential to occur, right? And so I'm trying to find it really quickly on like a standard potentials page. It's not here. They just have plain lithium. I don't know what the potential is for lithium carbonate formation. But for example, if it's whatever potential, and so lithium carbonate electrochemically from lithium containing solution. So where's the carbonate coming from? I guess I don't know how it would happen electrochemically. Like if you have a solution with Li plus ions and you just add like sodium carbonate, it will probably self-precipitate. Like if it's largely insoluble, the lithium and the carbonate will naturally come together. Like you don't need electrochemistry.
Yeah.
Now if you have like some other way that you're producing carbonate electrochemically, and then it's combining with the lithium. I don't know enough about this process. I'm just sort of thinking on my feet for a moment here. My hunch would tell me chronopotentiometry would be a difficult choice, only because chronopotentiometry would give you like, I want this amount of current, because in your head you're saying to yourself, I want like a milliamp per centimeter squared of lithium carbonate production, or whatever. But the potential is going to be whatever. And if the potential doesn't go to where it's favorable for lithium carbonate to form electrochemically, you won't do the reaction of interest, or there could be other reactions occurring on the side or competing for that current. So Chronoamperometry allows you to like pick a potential that's in a sweet spot, for instance, like just above or below, whether you're trying to oxidize or reduce to form lithium carbonate, but not too high or too low, such that you're having other things happen, like oxygen evolution or hydrogen evolution or something else. That's just my hunch, but again, I don't have a lot of experience with this, and I think I would need to know a little more about how the experiment actually works, because I don't know. I'm not familiar with this one. My hunch is that you want to control the potential to make sure that it's facilitating the reaction of interest more appropriately. That's what I can, I guess. That'd be my hunch.
All right, moving on. We have a question from Vishal. Vishal's asking, some softwares have fit options after selecting components. Still couldn't get a fit exactly. How to know what the exact values are? There's not much more detail than that.
Do Kramer's Kronig.
Oh, yeah.
So after you select your components and you're not getting a fit that looks great, one of two things is probably true. You picked the wrong circuit, or your data is not terribly accurate. Okay, so what you should get into the habit of doing, if hopefully your software program has it, or one of them has it, is to run Kramer's Kronig test on your EIS data. If your Kramer's Kronig test matches your data perfectly, then in theory you can do fit, and you just need to find the perfect circuit, and it might take you some time iterating, finding how many elements to pick, what's the right circuit. Sometimes it's not clear. Sometimes you're trying to just pick a circuit to make it look really close. Sometimes you are going to be more theoretical in your choice and say, I know I have a Randall's circuit because I have a one charge transfer process and diffusion and nothing else. And so I'm going to force that even if the fit isn't good. But if you do Kramer's Kronig and it doesn't fit perfectly, it doesn't mean you can't do your fit. It just means that in the situation that you've described, you might have like, okay, I picked two Randall's, two RCs, a Randall, whatever I picked, right? And it's not fitting great. Well, I do Kramer's Kronig and it's still not fitting great. Nothing will fit as well as Kramer's Kronig does. Kramer's Kronig is sort of by definition testing the perfect, I say fit, it's not really a circuit fit, but it's kind of like a circuit fit. And so if Kramer's Kronig doesn't fit your data very well, there is no circuit you can draw that will fit it better. As a rule of thumb, I always like to suggest that. So first check Kramer's Kronig that's not, you're not wasting your time basically trying to fit data that ought not to be. Like if it's not valid impedance, you just can't fit it in the first place. So don't waste your time. You might need to try to collect the data again and reduce the sources of drift or noise or things of that nature.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on. I don't know if this is a question or not. Vinette is just mentioning that he's using, Nova software. By extend the potential window, I might case check into it. Okay. Don't think that's a question. Audiophile has a quick one. Oh, actually, I don't know how quick it is. Hi, sir. I have a doubt on what potential was put on EIS for OER. Well, generally speaking, I'll just show you a real quick, kind of CV here. So if you're doing OER or EIS for OER, then you're going to get some kind of potential. You're going to get an LSV that might look something like this, right? So you have your voltage here and you have your current. And basically, I would say, you're visually looking like, okay, what potential do I start at? And I would say any potential between here and here is good because you're really looking at the onset potential, right? And there may be 50 millivolt, changes between each of these like dashed lines that I have. So you'll probably notice that your EIS results will be ever so slightly different at these different potentials, because you'll probably get, at this potential you'll get this signal, but at another potential you might get a much smaller, semicircle, because you have a smaller charge transfer resistance. It's easier to do it, here versus here. So, so you definitely want to do EIS for OER in a potential range where you're at the onset potential. You probably wouldn't want it up here where there's lots and lots of current, lots of stuff happening. You're probably going to get EIS that kind of looks a little bit like a straight line, as Neil has shown in previous, for previous questions. But around this onset, I think you'll learn a lot by actually doing EIS at a few potentials in this range here, where you're near the onset potential. So that's my kind of answer for your question, audio file, because I think we still have a few questions that are coming up, quite a few actually. All right, so moving forward, and again, let us know if you want further elaboration on this. But moving forward, Manoj has a question. In EIS, my x-axis is not starting at 0. Why is it not starting at 0? And how do I differentiate between electrode resistance, electrolyte resistance, and my application? My application is water splitting, and I've used a Randall circuit to fit the EIS data where I'm getting a semicircle and a 45-degree tilt line where the Warburg element. Where should I think the question is, where should the Warburg element be included in my circuit?
Yeah, I can pull that up again.
Yeah.
This one. So yeah, I guess like you caught that. I missed that. It seems like you're asking where does the Warburg element go? So most likely it goes just where. I need the Warburg one again. I need this one for you. That's the one. Okay. Had the wrong webinar slides. So first of all, Warburg element go, your semicircle and 45-degree line. Basically, maybe what you're thinking or referring to is that there are often two ways of representing it, this one and this one. And the short answer is that this one is bad. Don't use it. I'm moving it away. Go away. This is the right one. Okay, so this is the winner. There's some ambiguity. Mathematics, some cases, these can look kind of equivalent, and you'll find this one in the literature from time to time. People will put Warburg sort of on its own. I always like to highlight this now. Alex found this. You found this maybe, I don't know, 5-6 months ago or something. There's a recent publication by Mark Orazum. This is the reference here in the Journal of the Electrochemical Society. Mark Orazum, who, as Alex mentioned earlier, wrote basically the book on EIS. He's a professor at the University of Florida, and he's, an EIS expert for all, there's you can, plenty of people know the technique, but Mark Orazum is an expert. Just suffice it there. And effectively, he lays out in this paper the reasons why this is the correct configuration for where the Warburg element goes. So if you have a 45-degree line at lower frequencies, you should use this configuration. This is the proper Randall's circuit. And don't take it from me, take it from Mark Orazum. And if it's bad, you can blame Mark Orazum and not me, and that's what I'll tell you. Okay, so that's where it goes. To your first question, though, if you have an x-axis not starting at 0, I think I have a follow-up question. Do you mean? Let me. And my nose, you can hopefully comment. Is it situation one where you have this is 0, ZR minus ZI, and you have this distance right here, so it's like it's the x-axis, or is it situation two where I have my Nyquist plot and it's starting in negative territory like that, right? Is it negative? It's not starting at 0 as in negative z real territory, or it's just not starting at 0 on the y-axis, because those are very different things and very different why either of those situations would happen. So I guess I don't have a straight answer for you because I don't know which of these you mean. Where is it not starting at 0, or is it 1 or 2, basically? So
yeah,
I'll sort of stop there and we'll move to another question. While if you want to elaborate or clarify which thing, first graph. So it's the first. Okay.
Oh,
so he
first
just
graph.
answered.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.
So it's not this one. Good. That's good to know because that's a bad situation. Yeah. But so it's this one. So one of the reasons is I'll probably illustrate this actually for you. So let me simulate a circuit and I'll kind of show you why. It has to do probably with the value of the double layer capacitance. Okay, so let me show a fit with a Randall's element. Give me a moment to just get values here that let you see things clearly. I have to kind of play with the values a little bit here. Let's do this. And this will. I want this 3.5. This one, no, other way. You got to go down. All right. So here's my Randall's circuit, right? Let's just make this tail a little smaller so I can zoom in a little bit. All right. So I know this isn't like the perfect looking thing, but right now this is a situation. Look, it's like everything's at 0. It hits the axis. Well, I'll answer your question by just manipulating the values of one capacitor, which is the Q1, which is the double layer capacitance, right? How do I get the left side of this to not touch the x-axis? Other way. I had it backwards. Make it smaller. Okay. So one quick explanation is that you have a very small double layer capacitance, right? I'm just showing you right here. All I did was decrease the value of Q1 here, and look what happens. So one way to get around that is if I were able to go to a high enough frequency, like let's say 10 megahertz. This is kind of ridiculous. You wouldn't really need to do this, but that will fill in some of the high frequency points. It'll probably almost touch the axis, right? So I could go to a higher frequency. But if you're probably limited by your machine, maybe you're already at a megahertz, and you can't go to a high frequency. So there's really no need to like probe any higher. Plus, at higher frequencies, you get all kinds of craziness and noise, and maybe it's not even worth it. All it probably means is that it's the value of your capacitor is pretty small. That would be likely answer of this. Why there's probably reasons why the double layer capacitance is small, right? I don't know. Is it that your electrode surface area is somewhat small, maybe, right? That would lead to a small double layer capacitance. I don't know, some other low specific surface area. There's probably some electrochemical reasons for that, but that's graphically why this semicircle doesn't complete to the left. Basically, it's the value of this capacitance. So there you go.
Nice. Okay. All right. Moving on. All right. Let's see. There's a few questions, and we're trying to. We keep getting more questions, and as we run out of time, which is not a bad problem.
We're going to get to as fast as we can. Yeah.
So Vanette's asking, sir, what is a better technique for detection of any analyte in nanomolar concentration in solution? Square wave voltammetry or differential pulse voltammetry? Please elaborate pros and cons.
Probably differential. Well, honestly, either, right? Because
technique are actually in their
yeah,
like in their pulse, their waveform.
yeah.
Just off the top of my head, square wave tends to provide you with more more data, in the sense that like square wave tends to go like forward and backwards, while DPV tends to only go one direction. Square wave is sometimes faster. Actually, like if you think of it as an effective scan rate at like a particular frequency or period, square wave tends to be a little bit faster. But I think I'm trying to think.
All I can think about is that, or as a comparison, I don't know if it's pros and cons. It's more like it's not even like the right. Like your question's a good one, Vinny. It's not a bad question. It's more like they're just different. I mean, probably a more, if we had more time or to flesh it out more, or frankly, I was a little better at both techniques from a, like if I had studied it more thoroughly, I would give you a more thorough answer. But it's like the DPV, the primary difference in DPV and square wave is that the duration of the pulse up and down, right, of peak and background basically is identical for square wave. For DPV, it's different. For DPV, it's like 90% background, 10% top pulse. So the pros or cons, or the differences in my observation, I guess you'd say, is that for DPV, you probably want to do it for systems where, and help me here, Alex, if for example, there's a, like, let's say there's a big capacitance, it takes longer to settle at any given step. DPV would be better because the longer like background duration will really settle that pulse out nicely if it takes another millisecond or so. Whereas with square wave, it's just, like you said, it could probably go faster, crank your way through and just get that differential current. But the DPV is really going to like really focus on minimizing and subtracting the background out, because I'll try to draw what I mean. Here. And this is, go ahead.
You also have I think you're right, Neil. I also think that DPV, because what we're talking about is detection of analyte. A lot of people actually use square wave for as like actually a sensing tool, so they need it to actually go a bit faster. But DPV also gives you a little bit more control, because you have two different time scales you can work with. You can work with the pulse width. You can also work with the kind of like background, background timing, sort of say. Where in square wave, you only really have one time that you're adjusting. You're just adjusting kind of the frequency of those pulses going up and down. There's only one time variable that you're adjusting. But in DPV, you have another time variable that you are adjusting. The pulse width and the pulse, let's see, I think the words that we use in DPV are the period and the width. Both of these are kind of time elements. So there's a little bit more variability that you have control.
But you can see basically
adjust. Those two are the same.
This is time, and this is potential axes, right? So the point with square wave is that these are the same amount of time spent at each. So with DPV, on the other hand, this time again, and this is potential, this is the waveform, and this 2, right, or whatever, and this is 1. Now 2 is much greater than 1. So we're spending a lot more time. So it's like this here, 2, right, is like a chronoamperometry, basically, where it's like settling out. And so we're giving it like more. I know all the time is relative because this is all often milliseconds, but still for experiments that or analytes or concentrations that are responding at millisecond timescales, you're giving it more time to settle. And so my impression has always been from experience, from help from giving advice on this topic, DPV is like a really good technique for the sensitivity of detection, because it really gets you to like the differential current is more extreme because of the difference in time, letting this current settle out and not letting this current settle out. So it's like you get a really big difference between the currents of these two potentials. And so when you have a small amount of material in your solution, you can really detect it by like taking the difference at extreme, like between those extremes of wait time. So something like that, if that explanation kind of makes sense. That's my impression. So I guess my answer, if you will, my opinion would be DPV is going to be really powerful. You'll have to play with the parameters and optimize them and everything. But at detection of a, let's say, low concentration analyte of some kind, DPV is going to be pretty powerful.
Yeah. I think that's true.
That's my
I agree. No, that's good. Okay, let's see if we can get through some of these questions at the end. Claire has a question. Hello. Is it possible to flame anneal with a butane torch a Pine Research disk electrode? I'm trying to achieve a more pure, reproducible electrode surface following polishing.
If it's by itself, maybe.
Yeah, if it's just the gold disc insert or platinum disc, then yes, maybe you can. I'm always on the fence. Like whenever you use like a butane or any torch that has a hydrocarbon in it, I always feel like you're kind of putting it on the electrode surface. So that's one thing that I kind of
if there's any
about.
How efficiently do these burn? Right? Sometimes they don't burn perfectly efficiently, and like out comes the flame to clean your electrode or your disc or whatever. But maybe a little bit of raw butane comes out. These torches might not be perfect. And so, you might just be at the end of it inadvertently spitting a little bit of hydrocarbon onto your disc. And then you're back to square one of like, well, now it's still messy. Right. The only other things I would say, so just also to be clear, if it's an RDE electrode with like a shroud, Teflon or PEEK or whatever, the answer is a hard no. Do not do this. You will destroy the electrode. You will likely compromise the seal. Absolutely not.
That's right.
Right. But if it's a disc, I think officially probably our answer is that we might not generally recommend it for a couple of reasons. One is what you said. I think it's possible you could sort of end up possibly putting some hydrocarbon on, if depending on the quality of your torch, I guess. I'm not sure how likely that is, but it's a good thing to mention. The second is that it would depend on the heat of your torch and like the melting temperature of the metal. Now, something like platinum has a really, really high melting temperature. Probably not a big deal. Gold, it's a little softer. I think it melts at a little bit of a lower temperature. And if your torch is anywhere in the moderate vicinity of that temperature, you could soften the gold. If it deforms a little bit, you could have trouble fitting it back into the change disc tip, or using it, right? And if you deform the disc at all, it could compromise the fit. It could leak when you put it back in. And so that would be my other main hesitation. It depends on what the material is. Now, again, I think it's plausible. Something as hard and unlikely to deform, let's say, as platinum or like steel or something like that. It probably, like I used to flame anneal platinum like flag counter electrodes when I was in graduate school. That wasn't a disc. Its morphology did not matter. So if it did change or whatever, I didn't care. With a disc, you do, because it has to fit carefully into our U cups, into our change disc thing. So that's, I don't know if that's a firm answer for you, but those are the things that I would think about if you're going to think about doing this. Be cautious about all of those different things that could happen.
Yeah, you can also I use like a oxygen hydrogen torch if you're worried about like carbonaceous species, so you could use that as well. But also if you're trying to produce a more like reproducible like electrode surface, I'm like, do electrochemistry, like do electrochemical cleaning of the surface. Like that's going to get you the best, like electrochemically important surface. Unless you're doing some other chemistry to it. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my only other thing. But yeah, that's our stance. We're kind of low on time. Do we want to?
Yeah,
Do we want to
let's
just explain the OCP and then?
let's see. Let me just why don't you explain OCP and I'll scan and see if there's something I can answer quickly. I know there's a few other questions.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Sayeda is asking, can you explain OCP, the open circuit potential? Sure. So the simple answer, and of course I can get into more detail as needed, but the very simple answer, sort of say, is the open circuit potential is when you have an electrochemical cell, and I guess I'll draw this in kind of like two forms, sort of say. And let's say you have some, it's filled with some solution inside. Let's say it's water. And really, you have kind of electrode 1, and then you have electrode 2. And you take a voltmeter, sort of say, voltage, and you're measuring the voltage difference between these two guys at open circuit, which we consider to be the case where this guy here is not connected, or it's open. There's like a switch. Now, what we actually do, so in this case, OCP is when approximately zero current flows through the electrochemical cell. So it is the potential where no current is flowing through the cell. Well, it's like if I took a voltmeter and I put it to these two things, what is the voltage difference between 1 and 2? And in this situation, a voltmeter also has a very high, very large impedance, which is effectively, that's what's used to actually make the measurement. So that's so high that you get like less than a pico amp of current, maybe even femtoamps of current traveling through here. It really is so small it does not affect the voltage between these two. So that's what the open circuit potential is. That is what it's the potential between two electrodes when there's no current. Sometimes you have a third electrode in this type of situation, but there are more detailed explanations of the open circuit potential, but this is the simplest one that I usually tell people. So if you want further elaboration, let me know, but I'm going to keep it simple for now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I only wanted to ask one clarification before we leave. We are at about time now, but Manoj was asking about getting bad data basically in low resistance area and good data in high resistance semicircle. Do you mean low frequency and high frequency, or I don't know what you mean by low resistance area? Do you mean low resistance area is usually high frequency? Are you saying that you're getting bad data at high frequency and good data at low frequency? Or is it the other way around? Are you getting bad data at low frequency and good data at high frequency? Because high frequency and low resistance go together, and low frequency and high resistance usually go together. I don't understand where you're saying, because again, my answer for what is likely going wrong will depend on where your good data is and where your bad data is from a frequency perspective, most likely. I could give you an answer either way, and it isn't clear. So I'll give it a few minutes for you to clarify, but most probably I'll try to answer this next week if we can, as we are sort of at the time. So I do appreciate everybody. I think we tried to sort of answer questions. Abdul, I think you just asked a general question about doing EIS. I mean, our software, the one that I showed you just a moment ago, is our software called Aftermath Blue, and you can collect data with a Pine Research Potentiostat, do circuit fitting. You can also purchase circuit fitting licenses to import data from another potentiostat into aftermath blue to do circuit fitting. If you'd like, you can purchase those on our website. Basically, how do you draw an EIS graph? You're just asking a general question about how to do circuit fitting. That's a big question, right? I have a whole webinar on doing circuit fitting tips and tricks, and how specifically will depend on which software program you're using and which potentiostat that you have. As I said, I obviously know my company's equipment very well, and so those are the things that I was showing you today. But very broadly, most electrochemistry companies that make potentiostats and have software to control them often have software features to do analytical things like circuit fitting as well. So in the lower frequency area. So you're saying the lower frequency area is where the bad data is, Manoj. Is that what you're saying?
Which makes more sense.
It does make more sense. I mean, in short, it's that you probably have drift. Very, very, I guess that's sort of the answer, is that at low frequencies, drift often occurs because the sine wave at 100 millihertz takes 10 seconds to occur. And so when you are slowly drifting the potential up and down and the current up and down 10 seconds at a time, it's like doing cyclic voltammetry, kind of, right? It's not, it has more possibility to be unstable, non-linear. If the potential starts drifting a little for one reason or another, you'll get noise, you'll get drift, and your results will not be as good. And so low frequency noise and bad data, so to speak, is almost always invariably because of drift. It's almost impossible to do anything about this, I'll be honest. You can just keep taking your data, give it time, try to pick a applied potential that's as stable as possible, decrease your amplitude a little. A high amplitude will induce more of a response, and maybe that's drifting a lot more. But to a certain extent, the longer you sit at a particular condition and let the machine meander its way around a sine wave, the more possibility for drift that you have. So most probably that's the answer. So, All right. So I think we're going to have to call it there. I do see there's a few questions, and we'll try to add them to our list for next week to try to get to, as we always try to do and seem to fail. Yeah. But it's always, we do appreciate the questions, but we are about out of time. So
come early and ask your questions early on the live stream. Then we'll be able to get to them.
Early is relative here, but this live stream is every week from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. in the Eastern U.S. time. I know for folks of you that you guys are in different countries, we have a lot of viewers from India on our YouTube channel, and perhaps in the Middle East and in Europe, and it might be later. But I mean, for that matter, it's already late, so come an hour earlier.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, we really appreciate everybody for real, and as always, so we will see you next week, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. All right. So take care, everybody.